The roses bloomed crimson against the weathered fence, and Willa Chapman couldn't resist bending down to breathe in their perfume, as the morning sun painted the Nevada sky gold and amber in 1878. She hadn't expected anyone to witness this small moment of stolen pleasure. Certainly not the tall cowboy who stood frozen near the barn, his work-worn hands clutching a bucket of water, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip in an unfamiliar rhythm. Carson Vale had planted those roses 3 months ago, when he'd heard that old Mr. Chapman's daughter would be arriving from Boston to help run the boarding house after her mother's passing. He'd never met Willa, had only heard that she was refined, educated, probably too good for a dusty town like Pahrump, Nevada, where the desert stretched endlessly and hope came in small portions. But something about knowing a woman was coming to a house of men, to cook and clean and manage in her grief, had made him want to give her something beautiful. So he'd ordered the roses from a catalog, paid more than he should have, and planted them along the fence where the morning light hit just right. Now here she was, her dark hair escaping its pins, her simple calico dress already dusty at the hem, and she was smelling his roses like they were the finest thing she'd ever encountered. Carson cleared his throat, not wanting to startle her but unable to stay silent. Willa straightened abruptly, her cheeks flushing the same color as the petals. "I apologize. I didn't mean to trespass or take liberties with someone else's garden." "They're not someone else's," Carson said, setting down the bucket and walking closer, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "I planted them for you," she blinked, clearly confused. "For me? But we've never met." "I know. That sounds strange, doesn't it?" He pulled off his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I'm Carson Vale. I work at the Sullivan Ranch just outside town, but I rent a room from your father. Figured you could use something pretty to look at in the mornings. This town can be harsh on the eyes and the spirit." Willa studied him with an intensity that made Carson shift his weight. She had gray eyes, intelligent and assessing, with shadows beneath them that spoke of recent sorrow and long travel. "That was remarkably thoughtful, Mr. Vale. Thank you. Just Carson, please." He gestured to the roses. "Smell them with me each morning if you'd like. They bloom best in the early hours, before the heat gets too fierce." The invitation hung between them, simple but laden with possibility. Willa glanced back at the boarding house where her father would be waking soon, where the 5 other boarders would expect breakfast, where her new life of endless labor awaited. Then she looked at Carson, at his honest face and hopeful expression, and something in her chest loosened. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "Though I should warn you, my mornings start quite early. Mine too. I'm usually up before dawn to ride out to the ranch." "Then we'll share the sunrise," Willa said, and smiled for what felt like the first time in months. That first morning together set a pattern that would become sacred to them both. Carson began timing his departure to coincide with Willa's first moments outside, when she'd step onto the porch to shake out the rugs or draw fresh water from the well. They'd meet at the roses, sometimes talking, sometimes simply standing in companionable silence while the desert awakened around them. He learned that she'd left Boston not just for her father, but to escape a society that had no use for a woman with opinions and ambitions. She discovered that he'd come west after his parents died, seeking open spaces to match the emptiness he'd felt, finding purpose in hard work and honest sweat. The boarding house thrived under Willa's management. She had a gift for turning the simplest ingredients into memorable meals, for making the rough-hewn rooms feel like home. The boarders adored her, though Carson watched with carefully concealed jealousy when young Timothy Moss, a clerk at the general store, lingered too long over breakfast, Or when the blacksmith, a widower named George, offered to repair things that weren't quite broken. Willa noticed Carson's quiet possessiveness, the way his jaw tightened when other men vied for her attention. It pleased her more than she cared to admit, this evidence that their morning meetings meant as much to him as they did to her. But she was cautious by nature, scarred by a broken engagement in Boston to a man who'd promised her the world and delivered only criticism and control. She wouldn't rush into anything, no matter how her heart quickened when Carson smiled. 6 weeks after their first meeting, a late summer storm rolled across the desert, bringing blessed rain and violent lightning. Willa woke in the darkness to thunder that shook the windows and rain hammering the roof like horses' hooves. She thought of the roses, how the downpour might damage them, and felt an absurd urge to cry. They'd become more than flowers to her. They represented Carson's kindness, their growing connection, the fragile hope that she might find happiness in this stark landscape. When dawn finally came, gray and wet, she pulled a shawl over her nightgown and ventured outside, heedless of propriety. The roses had suffered, several blooms torn from their stems, petals scattered across the muddy ground. She was kneeling to gather them when Carson appeared, equally disheveled, his hair dripping, his shirt plastered to his chest. "I was worried about them," he said unnecessarily. "So was I," Willa admitted, holding the rescued petals in her cupped palms. "Isn't that foolish? They're just flowers." Carson knelt beside her in the mud. "They're not just flowers. There are flowers." The possessive pronoun hung between them, weighted with meaning. Willa met his eyes and saw everything she'd been feeling reflected back, multiplied, burning bright enough to rival the lightning. "Carson," she whispered, and he kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative despite the passion underlying it, a question asked and answered with the soft pressure of lips, and the shared trembling that had nothing to do with the cold rain. When they parted, both breathing hard, Carson cupped her face in his rough hands. "I'm falling in love with you, Willa Chapman. I know it's fast. I know you've got reasons to be careful, but I can't keep pretending this is just friendly conversation over roses. You're the first thing I think about when I wake and the last thing before I sleep. Tell me I'm not alone in this." Willa's heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "You're not alone. I feel it too, this pull between us. It terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I gave my trust once before and had it shattered. Because caring for someone means they can hurt you. Because this matters so much already, and I'm frightened of how much more it could become." Carson pressed his forehead to hers, heedless of the rain soaking them both. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you. I'm bound to be stupid and clumsy with words sometimes. But I can promise I'll never be cruel, never try to make you less than you are, never stop choosing you every single day. That's the best any man can offer, and I'm offering it with my whole heart." She kissed him then, deeper this time, tasting rain and hope and the beginning of something that felt like destiny. They stayed there in the mud until the storm passed, rebuilding the supports around the roses, talking about everything and nothing, learning the texture of each other's dreams. Willa's father, Edgar Chapman, was a perceptive man despite his grief. He'd noticed the way his daughter had come alive since Carson's arrival, how she hummed while cooking, how her smiles came easier. When Carson asked permission to court Willa formally, Edgar studied the young cowboy with the scrutiny of a man who'd already lost too much. "You got prospects beyond ranch work?" Edgar asked bluntly. "I've been saving, sir. The ranch foreman is getting old, and Mr. Sullivan has hinted I might take over when he retires. It's not a fortune, but it's steady. I'd provide for your daughter properly. And if she wants more than being a ranch wife, my Willa's got a mind sharper than most men I know. She'll need more than cooking and cleaning." Carson met his eyes steadily. Then I'd support whatever she wants to do. If she wants to keep running this boarding house, expand it, start a business, write a book, anything at all, I'd work twice as hard to make it possible. I don't want to own her, Mr. Chapman. I want to build a life with her. Edgar's stern expression softened. You really love her. More than I thought possible to love anyone, sir. Then you have my blessing. But hurt her, and you'll discover I'm not as frail as I look. Their courtship became the talk of Pahrump, not because it was scandalous, but because it was so obviously genuine. Carson brought Willa wildflowers from the desert, taught her to ride so they could watch sunsets from the hills beyond town. She mended his clothes with careful stitches, packed lunches that made the other ranch hands jealous. They attended the small church on Sundays, sat together at community gatherings, and made no secret of their intentions. Not everyone approved. Timothy Moss sulked, spreading petty rumors about Carson's past that had no basis in truth. A few of the town women whispered that Willa was too forward, too educated, that she'd make a poor wife for a working man. But most people saw what was plain. Two lonely souls had found each other and were brave enough to reach for happiness. 3 months into their courtship, Carson took Willa to see the Sullivan Ranch properly. It sprawled across the valley, cattle grazing on scrubland that seemed inhospitable but somehow sustained life. The ranch house was adobe and wood, sturdy and simple, with a wide porch that faced the mountains. Mr. Sullivan, a grizzled man with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "So this is the woman who's made my best hand completely useless," he said, shaking Willa's hand. "Boy's been riding into fence posts and forgetting to close gates, all because he's thinking about you." Willa laughed, delighted by Carson's embarrassed expression. "I apologize for the distraction, Mr. Sullivan." "Don't apologize. It's about time someone put stars in his eyes. Carson, show her the old foreman's cottage. You two should talk." The cottage sat a quarter-mile from the main house, small but well-built, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. It had been empty since the previous foreman died, windows shuttered, dust thick on every surface. But even abandoned, Willa could see its potential. "Mr. Sullivan said if I take the foreman job when Harold retires next spring, this could be ours," Carson said, watching her face carefully. "It needs work, lots of it, but it's got good bones. There's room to expand, add on. We could make it a real home." Willa walked through the space, imagining curtains on the windows, a proper kitchen, a bed they'd share as husband and wife. The thought made her blush, but she didn't shy from it. She wanted this life, wanted Carson with an intensity that still surprised her. "When were you planning to ask me?" she said, turning to face him. "Ask you what? Don't be coy, Carson Vale. When were you planning to propose?" He grinned, that slow smile that made her knees weak. "I was trying to be patient, do things proper, court you for a respectable length of time." "And how long is respectable? 6 months? A year?" Willa crossed the dusty floor to stand before him. "That seems excessive when we both know what we want." Carson's breath caught. "Willa Chapman, are you proposing to me?" "I'm simply suggesting that if you have a question to ask, I'm ready to hear it." He dropped to one knee right there in the dust and neglect, taking her hands in his. "I don't have a ring yet. I wanted to save enough to buy you something beautiful, worthy of you." "I don't need beautiful. I need you. Willa, I love you more than words can hold. Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on this cowboy and this hard life and this little cottage that needs so much work? Will you smell the roses with me every morning for the rest of our lives?" Tears streamed down her face as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes. Yes to all of it. Yes forever." They kissed in the abandoned cottage that would become their home, making promises in the silence, planning futures in whispered words. When they emerged, Mr. Sullivan took one look at their faces and started laughing. "Congratulations," he said simply. "I'll tell my wife to start planning. She loves a wedding." They married 6 weeks later in November when the desert air turned crisp and the brutal summer heat had finally released its grip. Willa wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, with roses from Carson's garden woven into her hair. The whole town turned out, cramming into the small church, spilling onto the street. Even Timothy Moss came, gracious in defeat, wishing them well with genuine warmth. Edgar Chapman cried openly as he walked his daughter down the aisle, placing her hand in Carson's with a whispered blessing. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Carson promised to love and cherish Willa, when she vowed to honor and respect him, everyone present felt the weight of their sincerity. The reception was held at the boarding house, tables laden with food the whole community had contributed. There was music and dancing, laughter and joy, the kind of celebration that bound people together in shared happiness. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Carson led Willa outside to the roses. "I've got something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small ruby, the color of the roses that had brought them together. "I know it's not much," Carson started, but Willa silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This day is perfect." They spent their wedding night in the cottage, which Carson and several ranch hands had spent weeks transforming. The windows gleamed, the floors shone, new curtains hung crisp and white. There was furniture, simple but sturdy, and a bed piled high with quilts. Someone had even transplanted several rose bushes outside the front door. Willa cried when she saw them. "You brought our roses here." "I brought our beginning here," Carson corrected, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Everything starts now, Willa, our real life together." That night they discovered each other with tenderness and passion, learning the language of bodies and pleasure, cementing their vows with physical intimacy that felt sacred. Afterward, wrapped in each other and the quilts, Willa traced patterns on Carson's chest. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I knew I could be. Happier than I ever was in Boston, pretending to be someone I wasn't. You see me, Carson, the real me with all my sharp edges and strange ideas, and you love me anyway. I love you because of those things, not in spite of them. Your mind is one of the things I love most. Well, that and your smile, and the way you hum when you're cooking, and how you scrunch your nose when you're concentrating." And she kissed him quiet, laughing against his lips. "I understand. I love you too in more ways than I can count." Their first year of marriage was hard in the way all beginnings are hard, full of adjustments and compromises and learning to be a team. Willa continued helping her father at the boarding house while making the cottage truly theirs. She planted a vegetable garden, learned to preserve food for the harsh winters, discovered she had a talent for raising chickens. Carson worked brutal hours at the ranch, proving himself worthy of the foreman position, coming home exhausted but always finding energy to help Willa with her projects. They fought, of course. About money, about time, about Willa's desire to do more than domestic work and Carson's fear that she'd wear herself out. But they learned to fight fair, to listen more than they spoke, to remember that they were on the same side even when they disagreed. And they always made up before sleeping, unwilling to let anger fester. Spring brought Harold's retirement and Carson's promotion. The increased wages meant security, the ability to save and plan. It also meant more responsibility, longer hours, stress that sometimes made Carson short-tempered. But Willa understood the weight of dreams being realized, the pressure of not wanting to fail. She supported him through the difficulties, celebrated his successes, became his partner in truth and deed. One morning in early summer, Willa woke feeling ill. She barely made it outside before vomiting into the bushes, much to Carson's alarm. It happened again the next day and the next, always in the morning, always leaving her pale and shaky. "You're seeing the doctor," Carson insisted after a week of this. "I don't need a doctor. I know what this is." He stared at her, hope and fear warring on his face. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without confirmation. Carson, I think we're going to have a baby." The joy that transformed his face was something Willa would remember forever. He picked her up, spinning her around despite her protests, laughing like a child. "We're having a baby. Willa, we're having a baby." They went to the doctor anyway, needing official confirmation of what Willa's body was telling her. Dr. Morrison, who'd practiced in Pahrump for 20 years, examined her thoroughly before pronouncing her healthy and approximately 2 months pregnant. "The baby should arrive in late January or early February," he said, his gruff manner softening at their obvious happiness. "Make sure you rest, eat well, don't overdo it. And for heaven's sake, young man, stop looking like you're going to faint. Women have been having babies since the dawn of time." Carson couldn't stop grinning. "I know, doctor, it's just this is our baby, our child. I can't quite believe it." Willa's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the summer heat. She continued working at the boarding house until her father insisted she rest more, worried about his daughter and coming grandchild. Carson became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a spoon, fretting whenever she looked tired. Willa found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him regularly. "I know, but what if something happens? What if you fall or get hurt, or then we'll deal with it. Carson, you can't protect me from everything. Life doesn't work that way." But she loved him for trying, for the way he talked to her swelling belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the desert and all the adventures they'd have. She loved how he built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth so no splinter could harm tender skin. She loved the way he looked at her like she was performing a miracle, which in a way she supposed she was. Autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and Willa's increasing discomfort. Her back ached, her feet swelled, and she felt ungainly and enormous. Carson insisted she was beautiful, glowing with life, but she felt like a lumbering beast. Still, when the baby kicked, when she felt that flutter of movement beneath her ribs, everything else faded into insignificance. They spent evenings planning, choosing names, discussing how they'd raise their child. Carson wanted to teach their son or daughter to ride, to love the land, to work hard and be kind. Willa wanted education, books, opportunities to be more than the sum of society's expectations. They agreed on the important things: love, honesty, encouragement to dream. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that was rare for the Nevada desert. Willa grew more uncomfortable as her due date approached, unable to sleep well, tired of being pregnant but terrified of the birth itself. Carson tried to hide his own fear, but she saw it in the tightness around his eyes, the way he flinched whenever she gasped from a particularly strong kick. "Women die in childbirth," Willa said one night, giving voice to the fear they'd both been avoiding. "I need you to know if it comes to a choice, don't," Carson said harshly. "Don't ask me to make that choice. I have to. If something goes wrong, if Dr. Morrison has to decide, I need you to promise you'll choose the baby. Promise me, Carson." He was crying, tears streaming down his face. "I can't lose you, Willa. I can't survive it." "Yes, you can. You're strong and you'd have our child to care for. Promise me." "I promise," he whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep and anguished. "But you're not dying. You're going to be fine, and our baby is going to be fine, and we're going to raise them together and watch them grow. That's what's going to happen." She held him while he wept, This strong man reduced to terrified husband and prayed he was right. Labor started on a January morning when the world was white with snow. Willa's water broke while she was feeding the chickens, a warm rush that soaked her skirts and left her gasping. Carson was at the ranch, and for a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. But she breathed through it, walked carefully back to the cottage, and sent one of the ranch hands to fetch both Carson and the doctor. The labor was long and brutal, lasting through the day and into the night. Doctor Morrison stayed, guiding her through the contractions, while Carson held her hand and whispered encouragement. Edgar Chapman paced outside, praying to a God he'd cursed when his wife died, begging for his daughter's survival. Willa had never known such pain. It consumed her, wave after wave, until she thought she might break from it. But between contractions, she found moments of clarity, looked into Carson's terrified eyes, and found strength she didn't know she possessed. "I love you," she gasped during one of those moments. "Whatever happens, I love you." "You're doing beautifully," he said, though his voice shook. "So strong, so brave, I love you so much." The baby came just after midnight, sliding into the world with a lusty cry that was the most beautiful sound Willa had ever heard. Doctor Morrison worked quickly, cutting the cord, cleaning the infant, checking for any problems. "You have a son," he announced, placing the baby in Willa's arms. "A healthy, perfect son." Willa stared at the tiny face, the miniature fingers curling and uncurling, and felt her heart expand to accommodate this new, overwhelming love. Carson touched the baby's head with trembling fingers, all written across his features. "Our son," he whispered. "Willa, look what we made." They named him Charles Edgar Vale, after Carson's father and Willa's, a bridge between past and future. Charlie, as they quickly began calling him, had his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He nursed eagerly, slept fitfully, and from his first day commanded the absolute devotion of everyone who met him. Willa recovered slowly from the birth, her body needing time to heal. Carson took over everything, cooking and cleaning and tending to Charlie whenever possible, marveling at the miracle of fatherhood. Edgar visited daily, cradling his grandson with tears of joy, seeing his late wife's features echoed in the baby's face. "Your mother would have loved him," Edgar told Willa. "She would have been so proud of you, of the life you've built." "I wish she could have met him," Willa said, her own tears falling. "I wish she could have seen that I found happiness, real happiness." "She knows," Edgar said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows." As winter gave way to spring, Willa regained her strength. She fell into the rhythms of motherhood, learning Charlie's cries, his preferences, the thousand small details that made up caring for an infant. It was exhausting and exhilarating, monotonous and magical. Carson helped whenever he could, walking Charlie through the cottage when he was fussy, changing diapers with increasing competence, singing lullabies in his rough voice. The roses bloomed again that spring, more abundant than ever. On Charlie's 3-month birthday, Willa carried him outside to smell them for the first time. Carson joined them, wrapping his arms around his wife and son, the three of them together in the morning light. "You kept your promise," Willa said softly. "We smell the roses together every morning." "I'll keep that promise until my last breath," Carson replied, kissing her temple. "You and Charlie are everything to me. This life we've built, this family, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." "We should plant more roses," Willa said thoughtfully. "Make a whole garden of them, different colors. Something beautiful for Charlie to grow up with." "That's a perfect idea. We'll do it together. Teach him to love growing things." The years passed with the kind of swift gentleness that marks true happiness. Charlie grew into a curious, energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk, his speech, his gestures. Willa divided her time between motherhood and helping expand the boarding house, which had grown prosperous enough that Edgar could hire additional help. She discovered a talent for business, for managing accounts and negotiating with suppliers, and Edgar increasingly relied on her expertise. Carson thrived as foreman, earning Mr. Sullivan's complete trust and respect. The ranch prospered under his management, and with prosperity came the ability to improve their lives. They expanded the cottage, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. They bought better furniture, saved money for Charlie's future, helped members of their community when times were hard. When Charlie was 3, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time the sickness was worse, lasting all day instead of just mornings, leaving her weak and miserable. Carson worried constantly, remembering the terror of Charlie's birth, but Willa remained optimistic. "Every pregnancy is different," she assured him. "I'm older now, more experienced. I know what to expect." Their daughter was born in September, a quick labor that shocked everyone with its ease. Dr. Morrison barely arrived in time, and Willa delivered with only an hour of active pushing. The baby girl was smaller than Charlie had been, but just as healthy, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that proved formidable. They named her Rose Elizabeth Vale, after the flowers that had brought her parents together and Carson's mother. Rosie, as she became known, was nothing like her placid brother. She was fierce from birth, demanding and particular, with a will that matched her mother's. Charlie adored her instantly, wanting to help with every aspect of her care. "Gentle," Willa reminded him constantly as he stroked Rosie's soft hair. "She's very small." "I'll protect her always," Charlie announced with the seriousness only a 3-year-old could muster. "Nobody will ever hurt my sister." It became his mission in life, this protection of Rosie. As she grew into a whirlwind toddler, Charlie was her constant companion, keeping her from danger, sharing his toys, tattling when she got into mischief. Rosie both adored and tormented him, the way younger siblings do, testing boundaries while depending utterly on his devotion. The cottage rang with children's laughter, the sounds of a family fully realized. Willa sometimes paused in her work, listening to Carson play with the children, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. This life, this love, this daily joy, she'd never imagined it possible during those dark Boston days when her future had seemed predetermined and bleak. Edgar's health began failing when Rosie was 2. It started small, a persistent cough, increasing fatigue, but progressed despite Dr. Morrison's treatments. Carson and Willa moved him into the cottage's new room, caring for him while managing their own responsibilities. Edgar bore his decline with grace, finding joy in his grandchildren, pride in his daughter's accomplishments. "You've built something real," he told Willa one afternoon while watching Charlie and Rosie play in the garden. "Something that will last beyond all of us. Your mother would be so proud, and so am I." He died peacefully one spring morning, Willa holding his hand while Carson corralled the confused, upset children. They buried him next to his wife in the Pahrump cemetery, the whole town turning out to honor a man who'd served his community well. Willa grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing her father had died happy, surrounded by love, certain of her well-being. The boarding house passed to Willa, who hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations while retaining ownership. The income it generated provided additional security for her family, allowed her to invest in the ranch, to save for Charlie and Rosie's education. She discovered she had her father's business acumen combined with her own innovative ideas, and under her guidance, the boarding house became one of Pahrump's most successful enterprises. Carson watched his wife flourish with pride and amazement. She was everything he'd hoped for and more, a true partner who challenged him, supported him, loved him with steadfast devotion. Their marriage had deepened over the years, passion tempered into something stronger, more enduring. They still had their morning ritual, meeting at the Roses while the children slept, stealing moments of intimacy before the day's demands descended. "You ever regret it?" Willa asked one such morning when Charlie was 7 and Rosie 4. "Taking a chance on a stranger who showed up from Boston?" "Never once," Carson said without hesitation. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. This family, this life, it's everything I wanted without knowing I wanted it." "I was so frightened when I came here," Willa admitted. "Grieving my mother, facing an uncertain future, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving Boston. Then I saw these Roses and you, and everything changed. I was terrified you'd think I was strange, planting flowers for someone I'd never met. It was the sweetest thing anyone had ever done for me. It still is." He kissed her there among the roses, tasting morning and coffee and home. "I love you, Willa Vale. I love you too, Carson Vale. Always." When Charlie turned 10, he announced he wanted to work at the ranch with his father. Carson was thrilled but cautious, remembering the hardships of his own youth, wanting better for his son. But Charlie was insistent, mature beyond his years, already showing the work ethic and dedication that would serve him well. "He's so much like you," Willa observed, watching father and son ride out together one morning. "The same quiet determination, the same kindness." Rosie, overhearing, piped up, "I'm like you, Mama. Papa says I'm too smart for my own good." Willa laughed, scooping up her fierce daughter. "Intelligence is never a bad thing, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you different." "I want to run the boarding house when I grow up," Rosie announced. "Make it even bigger and better. Then we'll teach you everything you need to know," Willa promised, delighted by her daughter's ambition. The years continued their gentle march. Charlie grew tall and capable, learning ranching from his father, developing his own ideas about land management and cattle breeding. Rosie became Willa's shadow, absorbing business lessons, charming the boarding house guests, showing early signs of the formidable woman she'd become. Mr. Sullivan retired when Charlie was 15, selling the ranch to Carson for a price far below market value. "You've earned this," the old man said simply. "You've given this place your best years, your loyalty, your dedication. It should be yours." The Sullivan Ranch became the Vale Ranch, a dream Carson had never dared articulate, suddenly realized. He and Charlie worked it together, implementing new techniques, gradually expanding their holdings. Willa invested boarding house profits into the operation, becoming a full partner in the enterprise. Together, they built something lasting, something they could pass to their children and grandchildren. Their marriage remained strong through all the changes and challenges. They still met at the Roses every morning, that sacred time unchanged by decades. They still talked for hours, sharing dreams and fears and everyday details. They still loved each other with a passion that had matured but never diminished, finding ways to prioritize their relationship even amid the chaos of family and business. When Willa was 43, she discovered she was pregnant again. The news shocked them both. They'd assumed their family was complete, had grown comfortable with Charlie and Rosie as young adults rather than children. Dr. Morrison, now elderly himself, expressed concern about Willa's age and the risks involved. "Women have babies in their 40s, Willa said practically, though she felt fear beneath her calm exterior. "It's not ideal, but it's not impossible." Carson was terrified, memories of Charlie's birth still vivid. "We don't need another child. I won't risk losing you." "It's not a matter of need or risk. There's a baby coming, and we'll welcome them with the same love we gave Charlie and Rosie." "I'll be careful. I'll follow the doctor's orders, but I won't spend 9 months in fear." The pregnancy was difficult. Willa tired easily, suffered from swelling and pain, spent the last 2 months largely confined to bed. Carson barely slept, checking on her constantly, terrified of finding her unconscious or worse. Charlie and Rosie, now 19 and 16, stepped up to manage household and ranch responsibilities, proving themselves capable beyond their years. The baby, another boy, arrived 6 weeks early on a cold February night. The labor was mercifully quick, but complicated by the baby's size and position. Dr. Morrison worked frantically while Carson prayed harder than he ever had, bargaining with God for his wife's life. Both mother and baby survived, though it was close. The infant, named Thomas Sullivan Vale after Carson's father and Mr. Sullivan, was tiny but strong-willed. Willa recovered slowly, weaker than she'd been after the previous births, requiring months to regain her strength. But she'd survived, and so had their unexpected miracle, and Carson counted each day a blessing. Tommy, as they called him, brought new energy to the household. Charlie and Rosie doted on their baby brother, helping care for him, marveling at his tiny perfection. Carson, older now and perhaps wiser, savored every moment of infancy he'd rushed through with his older children. Willa watched her family orbit around this new little life and felt complete in a way she'd never quite achieved before. The years flowed on. Charlie married at 23, bringing home a sweet-natured woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on ranch land, started their own family, gave Carson and Willa their first grandchildren. Rosie took over managing the boarding house at 20, transforming it into a proper hotel that became known throughout Nevada for its quality and service. She married a businessman from Carson City, someone who appreciated her drive and intelligence, who supported her ambitions. Tommy grew up surrounded by love and privilege his siblings had never known, yet remained grounded by their influence and his parents' teachings. He showed aptitude for both ranching and business, a blend of his parents' best qualities. Carson and Willa grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love undimmed. They still met at the Roses every morning, though sometimes they needed help walking the distance. They'd planted roses throughout the property over the years, creating the garden Willa had envisioned decades earlier, a riot of color and fragrance that drew visitors from across the territory. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Carson stood to make a toast. His hair was white now, his face lined, but his eyes still held the same warmth that had captivated Willa so long ago. 40 years ago, I planted roses for a woman I'd never met, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered family. I had no idea those flowers would change my life, would bring me everything I never knew I needed. Willa, you've given me more joy than any man deserves. You've been my partner, my love, my best friend. You've given me children and grandchildren, built a life and a legacy, made every single day worth living. I'd plant 1,000 rose gardens for just one more morning with you. Willa stood, taking his hand, tears streaming down her face. Carson Vale, you are the finest man I've ever known. You saw me when I was lost and gave me something beautiful to focus on. You loved me when I was too frightened to love back. You built a life with me, for us. Every morning I wake up beside you is a gift I never take for granted. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and that's saying something, because I loved you desperately even then. They kissed to applause and laughter, surrounded by the family they'd created, the legacy of that first morning when she'd smelled the roses and he'd asked her to join him. The sunset years came gently. Carson's joints grew stiff, his movements slower, but he still rose early to meet Willa at the roses. She developed a tremor in her hands, found reading difficult without glasses, but never missed their morning ritual. They handed over ranch operations to Charlie and Tommy, let Rosie run her hotel empire, and focused on each other and the grandchildren who brought them such delight. When Carson was 76, he had a stroke that left him weakened but mentally sharp. Willa cared for him with the same devotion he'd shown her through pregnancies and illnesses, refusing to let him slip into despair. They adapted, found new ways to communicate when words failed him, maintained their morning meetings even when he needed a wheelchair to reach the roses. "I'm sorry," he managed one morning, the words slurred but understandable. "Not the ending you deserved." "Hush," Willa said, holding his hand. "We're together. That's all that matters. You promised me mornings at the roses for the rest of our lives, and here we are, the promise kept." He recovered somewhat, regaining partial movement, relearning speech. They had 5 more years together, slower years but no less sweet. They watched their family grow and thrive, saw the ranch and hotel prosper, knew their legacy was secure. Willa died first, peacefully in her sleep at age 79, with Carson holding her hand. She'd spent the evening surrounded by family, holding her newest great-granddaughter, talking about the roses that would bloom soon. She'd kissed Carson goodnight, told him she loved him, and simply didn't wake up. Carson was devastated but not destroyed. He'd had 53 years with the love of his life, had built a family and a legacy, had lived fully and loved deeply. He mourned her with the same intensity he'd loved her, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the roses that still bloomed each spring. He lived another 2 years, gradually fading, ready to join Willa. His last morning, Charlie and Tommy helped him outside to the roses. The garden was magnificent, decades of growth creating a paradise of color and scent. Carson touched the petals with trembling fingers, remembering a young woman from Boston who'd stolen his heart by appreciating his simple gift. "Tell your mother I'm coming," he whispered to Charlie. "Tell her I kept my promise." We smelled the roses together every morning, right up until the end. He died that afternoon, surrounded by family, the scent of roses drifting through the open windows. They buried him next to Willa in the Pahrump cemetery, under a stone that read simply, "Carson and Willa Vale, together forever." The ranch and hotel continued under family management, prospering through the generations. The rose garden became something of a legend, carefully maintained by Carson and Willa's descendants, a symbol of the love that had started it all. Young couples courted there, weddings were held among the blooms, and every Vale child learned the story of their great-great-grandparents who'd found each other through flowers planted in faith. Charlie lived to 92, always starting his day at the roses, honoring his parents' memory. He told his grandchildren about Carson's quiet strength, Willa's fierce intelligence, the love that had sustained them through everything life offered. Rosie, equally long-lived, did the same, making sure the family history was preserved, that the younger generations understood their heritage. The cottage where Carson and Willa had raised their family was preserved as well, maintained exactly as it had been during their lifetime. It became a gathering place for family reunions, a tangible connection to the past. The original roses, carefully propagated, still bloomed outside the door, genetic descendants of those first flowers Carson had planted for a woman he hadn't met. Tommy's grandson, researching family history, found the catalog Carson had ordered those roses from in 1878. He located the same variety, nearly extinct now, and planted them throughout Pahrump as a tribute. The town embraced the gesture, making roses their unofficial symbol, telling tourists about the legendary love story that had started with flowers and faith. The boarding house turned hotel still stood, now a historical landmark, with a plaque telling the story of Willa Chapman, who'd arrived from Boston in grief and found unexpected joy. Visitors walked through rooms she'd managed, imagining her strength and vision, inspired by her example. But the true legacy wasn't in buildings or businesses or even roses. It was in the love that had started that long-ago morning when Carson saw Willa smelling his flowers and offered to share them with her. It was in the family they'd created, the lives they'd touched, the example they'd set of what marriage and partnership could be. Every Vale descendant grew up knowing that love required cultivation like roses, needed daily tending, thrived with attention and care. They learned that the grand gestures mattered less than the small daily ones, that showing up every morning was its own kind of promise. They understood that true love wasn't perfect or easy, but it was worth fighting for, worth building a life around. And every spring, when the roses bloomed in abundance throughout Pahrump, Nevada, people remembered Carson and Willa Vale. They remembered a cowboy who'd planted flowers for a stranger and a woman brave enough to accept his invitation. They remembered 53 years of marriage, of morning meetings and shared dreams, of a love that had transformed not just two lives but generations. The story became part of Pahrump's identity, told and retold, embellished and celebrated. Artists painted the rose garden, writers crafted stories inspired by Carson and Willa. Musicians composed songs about their enduring love. The tale spread beyond Nevada, becoming one of those legends the West was known for, proof that romance and tenderness could flourish even in harsh landscapes. But for those who'd known them, who'd witnessed their love firsthand, no story could quite capture the reality. The way Carson's face had lit up whenever Willa entered a room, even after decades of marriage. The way Willa's sharp edges had softened around her husband, revealing depths of tenderness reserved only for him. The quiet moments of understanding, the shared laughter, the comfortable silences that spoke of profound intimacy. Their great-great-grandchildren, gathering for a family reunion at the ranch, stood among the roses and tried to imagine those first meetings. How nervous Carson must have been, planting flowers for someone he'd never seen. How surprised Willa must have felt, finding beauty waiting in a town she'd expected to be utterly bleak. How neither could have imagined what would grow from that small gesture, what legacy they'd create. "Tell us again about how they met," a young girl asked her grandmother, who'd heard the story from Charlie himself. "Well, your great-great-great-grandmother Willa arrived in Pahrump in 1878, the grandmother began, settling into the familiar tale. She was sad because her mother had died, and she'd left behind everything she knew in Boston. But when she woke up that first morning, she saw the most beautiful roses blooming outside the boarding house. The children leaned in, even those who'd heard the story dozens of times, captivated by the romance of it all. She went to smell them, and that's when she saw him. Carson, a cowboy who worked at the ranch. He'd planted those roses just for her, hoping to give her something beautiful. And then he said something that changed both their lives forever. "What did he say?" the girl prompted, though she knew. "He said, 'Smell them with me each morning.'" And she did. Every single morning for the rest of their lives together, they met at those roses and started their day together. Through good times and hard times, through babies and losses and everything in between, they kept that promise. And that's how we know what real love looks like. The children scattered to play among the roses, creating their own memories in the garden their ancestors had planted. The adults remained, talking quietly, marveling at the continuity, the way the past remained present in flowers and stone and story. The sun set over the Vale Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, the same colors that had witnessed Carson and Willa's first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, all the moments that comprised a life fully lived. The roses released their evening fragrance, stronger somehow than during the day, as if exhaling the memories stored in their petals. And if you listened carefully, if you stood very still among those ancient blooms, you might almost hear them. A cowboy's rough voice and a woman's refined tones, murmuring promises and sharing dreams, laughing at private jokes, planning futures that had long since passed into history. You might feel the weight of their love, preserved somehow in this place they'd made sacred through simple daily devotion. The legend of Carson and Willa Vale lived on, not because their love was perfect or unique, but because it was true. Because they'd shown that happiness could be found in unexpected places, that taking chances on strangers could lead to extraordinary outcomes, that the smallest gestures like planting roses could change everything. And every morning, somewhere in Pahrump, Nevada, someone stood among the roses and thought of them. Thought of a cowboy brave enough to plant flowers for hope, and a woman brave enough to accept his invitation. Thought of 53 years of shared mornings, of promises kept, of love that transcended death to become something eternal. The roses still bloomed. The story still lived. And somewhere beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, Carson and Willa Vale still met each morning, still shared the sunrise, still kept the promise that had begun it all. To smell the roses together, always and forever.